Chapter 9. The Spell. Nancy stopped dragging Bean across the porch and looked at Ivy. "Who are you?" she asked. Ivy smiled and slitted her eyes with her white face and red blood drops. She looked very witchy. "It matters not. Free my friend," she hissed. Wow, thought Bean. She's really going for it. Nancy dropped Bean's arm and lifted one eyebrow, which was something she had just learned how to do and do all the time. "What that's supposed to be?" she asked in a snippy grown-up way, looking at Ivy's wand. Ivy shook the wand in Nancy's face. "This is your doom," she said in a deep voice. "It's a wand," said Bean, looking back and forth between Ivy and Nancy. She was beginning to worry. Maybe Ivy was going for it too much. With older sisters, you had to be able to say that you never meant what you said, that you were kidding the whole time. Ivy didn't seem to know that. Nancy snorted. "It's a stick," she said. She looked at Ivy's robe and giggled. "Nice bathrobe, too. You guys are complete and total dweebs." Uh-oh. Bean looked at Ivy. Her cheeks were red under the white paint and her eyes glittered. She looked like she might cry. Suddenly, Bean was furious. Before, she had been really mad, but now Nancy was making fun of Ivy, and that made Bean furious. Without even stopping to think about it, Bean reached down into the bucket she was still carrying. She got a big handful of pink worms. For a second, they squiggled in her hand, and then she threw them at Nancy's face. Some of them fell into Nancy's shirt. Some of them got stuck in her hair, but one landed on her eyebrow and wiggled there, trying to find some dirt. Nancy was so surprised she froze. She just stood with her mouth hanging open, staring at Bean. Calmly, Bean reached into the bucket again and got another handful of worms. She aimed better this time. She got one in Nancy's mouth. Phew! The pink worm went flying as Nancy spit it out. There was a tiny moment of quiet, and then she opened her mouth wide and let out a giant scream. Bean and Ivy looked at each other and smiled. Whatever happens next, their eyes said, this was worth it. And then they began to run. Nancy tore after them, still screaming. Bean zigzagging across the lawn because she knew it was harder to catch someone who was zigzagging. Ivy zigzagged too, right behind Bean's. "Worms! Worms!" Nancy was screaming. She had lost her mind. Ugh! Bean could hear her mother calling, "What on earth? Girls! Girls!" Bean and Ivy ran around the trampoline with Nancy close behind. They jumped over the hula hoops and the slit and headed for the trees. Nancy followed, still screaming. She was right behind them. She was so close she could grab the soft folds of Ivy's robe. She was just about to get it. "Help!" squealed Ivy. Bean gave a yank and pulled the robe away in the nick of time. Ivy and Bean swerved for the playhouse. Maybe they could get it inside it before Nancy tackled them. "Come on," Bean yelled. Together they jumped over the worm pit, squeezed into the playhouse, and slammed the door. "Whew," they said together. Then it happened. Nancy was still chasing them, still was running toward the playhouse and toward the worm pit, the big, muddy worm pit. Bean and Ivy knew it was there. But Nancy didn't, and she didn't see it. She charged toward the playhouse, and whoops, her foot landed on the side of the muddy pit. Ivy and Bean looked out the playhouse window, and they saw Nancy skidding on the slimy edge of the hole. Back and forth she wobbled, trying to keep her balance. She kicked out one foot. She waved her arms wildly. She kicked out her other foot. She waved. She kicked. Ah, it's perfect. She's dancing, yelled Bean. The spell worked, yelled Ivy. And just at that moment, with a sloppy, gloopy thud, Nancy slipped off the edge and landed into the muddy goo at the bottom of the worm pit.